Hello and welcome to another 140k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Brennan Howell for sending in some awesome pictures of his 23rd Screaming Eagles Cadian Remnant in action against some orcs. I really like this colour scheme. The blue with the snow bases, it just makes me feel all cool and relaxed and calm. Looks very, very cool. Could almost say they were Valhallans or maybe even some sort of Ultramar Auxilia, but of course these are not either one of those. They're the 23rd Screaming Eagles. Massive thank you for sending these pictures in, Brendan. They look absolutely awesome. I think you did a really, really good job with them. If anyone else has got any cool pictures they want me to use in my videos, then please post them on my Facebook page or email them to me at mordianglorytv@gmail.com. Without further ado, let's take a look at today's video. So today, guys, I want to talk about mortal wounds. I want to talk about how you can spam as many mortal wounds as possible. And I think I've tracked down every single source of mortal wounds that we have access to. There is one caveat. I have not included sources of mortal wounds that are specific against a certain type of enemy. For example, if it's a psych out grenade that only does mortal wounds against demons, then I've not included that. These are mortal wounds that you can do against every single target. Okay, so that's the plan for today's video. Now, some of these are going to be useful, and some of them are going to be, I'm mentioning them because they can do mortal wounds, but you're not likely to use all of them. But what you'll get from this video, hopefully, is an idea of, okay, these are all the tools available to me. These are all the areas I can get mortal wounds. And then it's kind of going to be up to you how much you leverage. You might want to go nuts, go all in, go balls to the wall and use every single one of these. Or you might just want to use some of them. I'll obviously mention as we're going through which ones are my favourite and which ones I would avoid. But that's it. So without further ado, let's dive straight into this and start looking at how we can melt our enemies' brains with our mind bullet. So speaking of mind bullets, let's start off with the psychic powers. And the first one that of course is very obvious is you can use the psychic power smite. Smite is a psychic power that pretty much all factions in 40k get access to, and it's pretty simple. There's a warp charge value of 5, and if you get it off, then you do D3 mortal wounds. If you happen to get it off on a 10 or greater, then you do D6 mortal wounds. So what that tends to mean for us in the guard is if you get it off on a 10 or 11, then you're doing D6 mortal wounds, and that's fine. If you get it off on a 12, then you're getting a perils. And if you've got any commissars in your army, you're losing a psyker. Now, you're not likely to have commissars in your competitive army these days, but I guess if you're spamming a lot of mortal wounds, you're likely to have a lot of Pels of the Warp going off, and you don't want to do mortal wounds yourself, so maybe having a commissar isn't the worst thing in the world. So, the first one is smite. Now, you can smite more than once. Most psychic powers, you can't do more than once, but you can smite more than once. But every time you do smite, it gets harder to cast by 1 each time. So, the first time you cast smite, it's a 5. Second time you try and cast smite, it's a 6. Third time you try and cast smite, it's a 7. So on and so forth. Now, we can get around the fact that basically after a 7, you're not really likely to get it off. I mean, you can keep trying, of course, but if you try and fail, you've still tried, and so you're making it hard for the psykers, right? So, guard can realistically get off, I would say, 3 smites in a turn without much help, because you know, after that, you're looking at less than a 50-50 chance, and you've always got a CP to try and get a reroll. You see what I mean? So guard can get 3 smites off pretty easily. You know, warp charge 5, warp charge 6, warp charge 7. However, you can actually get more smites off than that if you're clever about it. So the first thing to mention is that what psykers can we get access to? Because all well and good talking about smites and stuff, but what psykers do we get access to? So we get access to the Astropath, the Primaris Psyker, the Weird Vein Psyker, and then we also have a named character from Blackstone Fortress, which as of recording this video, you can still take Adria Medellin, who, I always mess the name up on that one, who is basically a named Primaris Psyker. Now, you normally take her because she has a unique power that lets you put +1 to hit on an infantry unit, but she's still a Primaris Psyker. And if you're spamming a lot more wounds, you might have taken 3 Primaris, then she's still a way for you to essentially get 4 Primaris Psykers. Of course, we then have access to things like Inquisitors as well, but we'll get to those in just a little bit. So, if you have got access to... The thing about our Psykers is that some of them aren't very good. In fact, the only Psykers that can just cast Smite on 2d6 dice are Primaris Psykers and Adria. Astropaths and Weird Vein Psykers only cast Smite on a single d6. They cast other powers just fine. Well, I think the Weird Vein, it's actually only ever 1d6. But your Astropaths can do other powers just fine, but they can only do smites on a single d6. So when you're looking at doing smites, you want to be looking at your Primaris Psykers, essentially. Now, so that's just to mention that's how you sort of leverage your smites as best as possible within the Astra Militarum Codex. Now, we also have access to a couple of other psychic powers in our codex that do mortal wounds. So you get Psychic Maelstrom and you get Gaze the Emperor. Now, Psychic Maelstrom is pretty good. It can be kind of tricky to get off, though. It's got a relatively high warp charge. So it's warp charge 7, so 50-50 chance of getting that thing off. But if you do get it off, then what happens is you roll a dice. On a 2+, you do a mortal wound. And then you roll another dice, and on a 3+, you do another mortal wound. And then you roll another dice, on a 4+, you do another mortal wound. And 5+, another mortal wound, 6+, another mortal wound. Then after that, it stops. So you can get 5 mortal wounds off from the single psychic power, although typically you're likely to get 2. You've got a 50-50 chance of getting 3, and then after that, diminishing returns. Although I have, in my history, and even had it on a battle report on this channel, it was an old one from 8th edition, I have had a Astropath just go nuts and just do all 5 mortal wounds. So it does happen. It can happen. You also have Gaze the Emperor. I should say, Psychic Maelstrom is relatively easy to get off. It's an 18-inch range. Gaze the Emperor is a bit different. Gaze the Emperor is like, it has almost like a 0-inch range in a funny sort of way. What happens is you get the power from a 6, so more than likely you will get it off. And then you draw a straight line away from the Psychic, any direction you want, and you roll 2d6. So you might get a 2-inch line, you might get a 12-inch line. You just don't know. You do a straight line, 2d6 from the model, and every model that line passes over on a 4+, that unit suffers a mortal wound. So it's not great, but if you essentially get that Psyker in point blank and you get an average of like, let's say it's an inch away from the enemy, and you get that line off, it should go an average of 7 inches. And so if you think that's probably like 3 to 4 models you'll be able to get under that line. So potentially it's a source of like 2 mortal wounds. It's not a great power, but it is a source of mortal wounds, and it is a psychic source of mortal wounds. So just something to be aware of. Now, after that, you start looking at you start looking outside of your own psyche. You start looking at things like Inquisitor. Now, before we do that, I want to mention this thing I was talking about before about being able to get more smites off than 3. You see, in the Greater Good, there is a stratagem that you get access to, and it's only like 1 CP, and it is Psychic Conclave. And what happens is, if you take a unit of Weird Vein Psykers and you have a Primaris Psyker, for 1 CP, you can make both of those units cast an additional psychic power, and both of those units gain access to +2 to casting a psychic power. Now, that's pretty good. So, how you can really leverage it, you have to be kind of careful. If you take a big unit of Weird Vein Psykers, they actually, even though they only roll 1d6 to get off any psychic powers, if you take a unit with, I think it's like 3 or more models in it, and then it gets +1 to cast, and if you take a unit with like 6 or more models in it, then it gets +2 to cast. It might be slightly different to that, but basically the more models you have, the more power the Psykers get off. Now, on its own, taking a big unit of Weird Veins and being like, oh, +2 to cast, I only got like, what, I've got like a 66% chance of getting that first smite off, because if you roll a 3, it's like maybe it's like, what, like a 50% chance? So it's like, no, it's greater than 50% chance. You roll a 3, then you get that first smite off. However, if you use Psychic Conclave, and the first time you roll that smite with the Weird Veins, it actually goes off automatically. Now, how I would do this is I would go, right, I'm going to get a big unit of 2 big units of Weird Veins. The first one is just going to try and cast Smite. Okay? Now, it gets it off on a 3+. Okay, so more than likely that unit's going to get it off. So greater than 50-50 chance. And then you go, right, now I'm going to use Psychic Conclave. And what's going to happen is I'm going to use my Primaris Psykers to do some stuff, but I'm going to use a second unit of Weird Vein Psykers to try and cast Smite again. Because I don't think 1 unit can cast Smite more than once, so you can't have 1 unit of Weird Veins doing it. Now that means that next unit of Weird Veins that's casting Smite is going to get it off on a 2+, because it's got +4 to cast. And then the Psych, and then you've got the Primaris Psyker. Now you don't have to cast with that Primaris Psyker yet, you just know that Primaris Psyker's got +2 to cast, right? So before you go, right, I'm going to cast another Smite straight with the Primaris Psyker, you go, I'm going to try one more smite with, let's say, an Inquisitor, because the Inquisitor has a 50% chance of getting that off, right? Because it's if you do like a double smite Inquisitor, for example. So Inquisitor then has a chance of getting off with the CP reroll, so that's 3 smites you got off. Then you're like, right, now I'm going back to the Primaire Psyker, who's still got +2 to cast. Now, yeah, I'm now casting this smite on an 8, but I've got +2, which means I'm actually getting it off on a 6, which again is more likely than not. And so you've actually got a way of being able to get 4 smites out. And there's 4 smites that you can that are greater than 50% chance of going off. And if you've got a greater 50% chance, then it's like, it's good odds, right? So every single one of those powers, that's actually like 4 sources of pretty decent smite going off right there, which is nice. And then you start going, well, now I'm going to do Psychic Maelstrom as well. And now I'm going to do Gaze of the Emperor as well, like some sort of crazy sacrificial astropath or something. Okay. That's a lot of sources of mortal wounds. We say on average, each one of those sources of mortal wounds can do 2, on average, does 2 to 3 mortal wounds. Then if you've got 6 sources of mortal wounds there, that's an average of 12. Now, and really, yeah, I think that probably averages out, because sometimes Gaze will go further than others. Sometimes Psychic Maelstrom will go off, sometimes it won't. Don't forget, though, Psychic Maelstrom, you're trying to cast it, your Primaire Psyker, that's still got +2 to cast, can then try and get Psychic Maelstrom off on a 5+. So actually, it does go off fairly reliably at that point. So that is 6 sources of mortal wounds, 4 smites and 2 other powers that you can get off pretty reliably. And on average, you're looking at about 12, 13 mortal wounds from that. We're not finished yet. There are still some mind bullets that we get access to. So the next one is, we talked about this double smite Inquisitor. Now, it doesn't actually do smite twice. It's an Inquisitor that can do smite, and it's an Ordo Malleus Inquisitor, which means they can do like 2 psychic powers, which means they can also do castigation. Now, castigation, which I sometimes like to nickname castration, is a psychic power with, like, I think it's Warp Charge 5 or Warp Charge 6. Either way, it's pretty easy to get off. Again, we're looking at powers that we can get off with 50% or greater chance. And what happens is you roll 3d6. If you beat the enemy's leadership, then you do d3 mortal wounds to them, which is pretty good. So again, that's a 7 psychic power that you should get off, that you should do at least 2 mortal wounds. And now we're looking at an average of like 14 to 15 mortal wounds. That's not bad at all. That is, if you're looking at like a squad of Terminators, that is a squad of 5 Terminators just killed. Just utterly just gone. Okay, and we've got all of that from a couple of like Wordvane Psyker units and a couple of Astropaths or Primaire Psykers and an Inquisitor. It's not actually a huge amount of points. You're probably looking at like about 200 to 300 points for all that. If that, I'm being cautious there. So not bad at all. Not bad in the slightest. And then you start looking at, okay, right, so that's the mind bullets. But there are other sources of mortal wounds that don't rely upon psychic powers, and the first one you can take is Officer of the Fleet. Now, he has an ability called Strafing Run, where on a 4+, an enemy, it's once per game per Officer of the Fleet. So if you take 3 of them, you can do this 3 times. But on a 4+, an enemy, it takes D3 mortal wounds. On a 6, it takes 3 mortal wounds. Now, on its own, that doesn't sound very good, but there's a stratagem in the greater good. Now, technically, it's a Militarum Tempestus stratagem, but it's not for the Militarum Tempestus, it's for the Officer of the Fleet. So as far as I am aware, and correct me if I'm wrong down in the comment section below, guys, but you can do this on an Officer of the Fleet even if you're not taking like a Scion detachment. Now, if I'm wrong there and you might take like 1 unit of Scion to back this up, that's fine. Just let me know down in the comment section below. There's always these weird... 9th edition is so complicated, it's hard to keep up with all the little quirky interactions. But basically, what that does is you spend 1 CP and it gives you +2 to the air raid requested ability. It's not straight, it's called air raid requested. Now, that means on a 2+, you do D3 mortal wounds. And on a 4+, you do 3 mortal wounds. Now, that's really, really good. If you've got 3 of these guys, that's actually pretty solid mortal wound output. And it only costs you 75 points. And the good thing about Officer of the Fleet is that they actually have like the officer keyword, so you can start using them for like other things like secondaries and raising banners, and they're actually not too bad actually. So that's another source of mortal wounds right there. You've then got the Death Strike missile. Now I'm not even going to really cover the Death Strike because it's one of those units that I'm mentioning because it exists, but it's not viable. Death Strike missile is very unlikely to actually do anything. And in order to make it actually do many mortal wounds at all, you need to spend like 6 CP on it or something crazy. You need to do like Vortex Missile, and you need to start doing like reroll, you know, like Overland Fields of Fire, all that kind of stuff. Look, basically, guys, it is a source of mortal wounds, but the Death Strike is rubbish. And so we're just going to skip straight past it onto another rubbish one where there is a stratagem in the guard book called Fire My Position. Now, when a squad dies in combat, you can spend 3 CP, so again, it's not really worth it. And basically, on a 4+, an enemy unit in engagement range takes D3 more wounds. It's kind of represent where the guy in the radio is like, call in the artillery on my coordinates, you know, because he knows they're going to die anyway. It would be good if it was 1 CP, combined with the fact that we now get 3 Voxcasters, but it's 3 CP and it only does on a 4+, and it only does D3 mortal wounds, so overall it's rubbish. If I was to fix that, I would just make it 1 CP and they just take D3 mortal wounds. Because D3 mortal wounds in this day and age isn't that much of a big a deal. So then the next one you've got is, again, not super reliable, but you've got Hellhounds. Now, Hellhounds don't do mortal wounds on their own, but when they explode at a 4+, they do mortal wounds. And so if you're willing to be a bit cheeky with them, drive them right down the enemy's throat, then when they blow up, you'll do D3 mortal wounds. So that's pretty good. You then also got access to some of the other bits from the greater good. So you've got access to Bullgryns. Now, Bullgryns on their own don't do any mortal wounds, but they do have access to a 1 CP stratagem, Furious Charge, where basically every time you charge into Bullgryns, for every Bullgryn you get into engagement range, you roll a dice on a 4+, the enemy unit was 1 mortal wound. So if you get a big unit of Bullgryns in, 9 of them, then you can do between 4 and 5 mortal wounds, which isn't bad at all. I used to poo-poo the stratagem, but I've actually used it a fair few times now, and it actually does give those Bullgryns the little bit extra punch that they need. So it's not something to be totally disregarded. You then also have access, so a lot of those are sort of out, like stratagems or things blowing up. Just straight up ability to do mortal wounds. Guard actually does get access to Volcanic weaponry. Now, a lot of people here will probably, well, if you've ever been to a tournament and faced Marines, you've probably come across a Volcanic Dreadnought at some point. And you know that Volcanic weapons are really fucking annoying, right? Now, Guard actually gets access to Volcanics via the Carnodon, which is a Forge World tank. Now, you can take it in 40k, and it's actually relatively cheap. It's only 110 points. And you can give it a Volcanic Culverin and 2 Volcanic Cavaliers. Now, these weapons are 30-inch range. Well, the Volcanic Cavalier is 30-inch range. The Volcanic Culverin is 45-inch range. They both, the pair of Cavaliers does 2 shots per Cavalier, so that's 4 shots per pair. The Volcanic Culverin does 4 shots, so you get 8 Volcanic shots per tank. And each time you roll a wound roll of 6, you do mortal wound. So, a good volley, one of these things is doing a mortal wound a pop. Now, that's not too bad. Also, they're strength 5 and strength 6, and they're no AP, but they are damage too. So, they're actually relatively cheap. And if you had to ask me which way I'd take, a Hellhound or a Carnodon, I'd say a Carnodon every single time. Now, Carnodons aren't as good as even Russes because they only have a 3+ save. They've kind of been left in the dirt a little bit, but they still, and they only hit on 4s, but they still have 12 wounds, toughness 7, 3-up save, and they still get Armor of Contempt now. So, they're not bad. And like I said, if you're like a Hellhound lover, you might as well take a Carnodon instead if you can like kit bash it or something. Now, another source of wounds that we get is sniper rifles. Now, sniper rifles aren't great because you have to try and get your 4 to hit or your 3 to hit, and then you've got to get a 6 to wound again. But they're not bad, and now that veterans take them for free, and you kind of want to be taking veterans like extra line infantry squads in a battalion. You'll have access to 9 sniper rifles if you're going down that kind of route. So that's not bad. Also, special weapon squads can take them. So you do get Ratlings. Ratlings are kind of expensive. So when you're looking at it, it's like you'll be looking at 9 to 18 sniper rifles. You'll probably get a few mortal wounds that way. Now, special mention is also you have Gaunt's Ghost, and you've got Larkin's sniper rifle, which does D3 mortal wounds. So that's just something to be aware of. Now, we've also got a few other sources of mortal wounds as well. So firstly, if you're taking Scions or you're taking Land and Lions, for 1 CP, you can use Gifts of the Mechanicus, which means when you're rolling a wound to hit, I believe it's with anything, but it might just be hot shots, then you get 6 to a wound does a mortal wound, which can be quite good if you're using like masses of hot shot lasguns. Catachans also have a stratagem, Vicious Traps, which can do D3 more wounds, but it's kind of situational setting it up. The Scions also get a relic. Now, I believe this is the Thatoid Eagles that get access to a relic hotshot las pistol called the Fire of Judgment. And it fires 2 shots. And if you get a hit, that not a wound, a hit, then you do 1 mortal wound. Now, it is only 12-inch range, but, I mean, that's pretty cool that you can just, like, get a couple of more. You know, a Scion is likely to get 2 hits with that, a Scion Commander. So, potentially, that's 2 mortal wounds right there. Not to be discounted. And then you also get access to the Caladius Assassin's Njord Shredder, which does lots of mortal wounds. And then there's a couple of really obscure ones here that I found. You get the Cartographica Rogue Trader, who has a digital laser, which can do some mortal wounds, and a concealed Archaeotech weapon as well, which is D3 mortal wounds. So that's kind of interesting, but those are really kind of out there. And then, of course, you've got the good old Vindicare Assassin, who, if he doesn't kill his target, you start rolling dice to see if headshot goes off and he does some more mortal wounds that way. Now, that is it in terms of all the mortal wounds that I was able to find. I'm sure there's probably some I've forgotten. I'm thinking like Demon Hosts probably do mortal wounds. There's probably some, like, you can always go down the Gene Stealer Cult route and take a lot of this stuff and then Gene Stealer Cult it up and then like have psychic powers from like Brood Gene Stealer Cult stuff. I don't know. These are all of the sort of ones that I was able to find. But if there's any that I've missed, please let me know down in the comments below. Now, I know some people will say Cyclops Demolition Vehicles. I actually checked. They don't do mortal wounds anymore, unless I've misread it or my battle scribe hasn't updated. They don't do mortal wounds anymore. They just do like a big explosion, like a big like battle cannon kind of explosion. So that's a bit of a shame. But it doesn't. If I'm wrong about that, let me know. But like I said, if there's any I've missed or anything you think any mistakes I've made, let me know down in the comments section below. And anyone who's watching this, if you think there's some I might have missed or you want to know any additional ones, check the comment section down below. The comment section, the Imperial Guard community is really good at keeping me honest, and they always catch stuff that I miss. I always say half the content's in the videos, half the content and advice is in the comment section, so seriously check it out. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe and a comment. I'll be totally honest with you guys. Any extra interaction that you can give over just a view makes a huge difference for boosting the popularity of the video. And you know, the YouTube AI algorithm really picks it up. So if you could consider giving it a like and a subscribe and all that kind of good stuff, that would be absolutely fantastic. And if you've really enjoyed today's video and you want to go the extra mile for supporting the Mordian Glory channel, then consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It is thanks to the generous support of the channel members and the patrons that this is now my full-time gig, which is just crazy. And quite frankly, guys, it's thanks to them that I do any content at all. I mean, the Patreon support has supported me going to tournaments for a long time, testing these things out, bringing them back, all that kind of good stuff. So massive thank you to all of my channel members and Patreon supporters. You're all truly wonderful people. I want to do some shout outs for our latest joinees is what I'm going to call them. So massive thank you to Tent, Ian Hawkins, Paul Savage, Panzer Kampfwagen, Baneblade, Trichoma, Castellan and StrikeEv3 for becoming channel members. Thank you guys for doing your part and joining the Mordian 50th Rifles. I also want to say thank you to our latest Patreon supporters. Naril, Alex Stengal, Gankistani, Ben Thorne, Alon Harfin, Marcus Roberts and Timber de Jägermeister. Thank you guys for signing up on Patreon. I really, really appreciate the support. I also want to take a moment to say a personal thank you to all of our top tier Patreon supporters. These are the guys that have gone well above and beyond any kind of Call of Duty to support the Mordian Glory channel, and they're truly generous people. So I want to say a personal thank you to Alex Stengal, John Stubbs, Nicholas Walsh, Swordfish Trombone and August Varney for being signed up at the Lord General level. That's the top tier of Patreon support. Guys, it's absolutely incredible and I hope you know how much I appreciate it. I also want to say a special thank you to some of our other top tier Patreon supporters. Diesel Fox, Ross Miller and Tom Sutton for being signed up at the Commissar level, another really high tier of Patreon support. Thank you to every single one of you and all of my supporters for your generosity. It truly is, it's humbling guys, it really is. So massive thank you, I hope you enjoyed today's video and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.